Shifting focus back to G7 summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Donald Trump met at the summit, which also marked their first in-person interaction in over a year. The two leaders came face-to-face during the G7 family photo. Prime Minister Modi and President Trump were seen interacting with world leaders as they walked onto the stage. As the group photo session came to an end, President Trump walked off the stage with Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi and Italy's Giorgia Meloni. Prime Minister Modi was also seen huddled in a conversation with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and others. The ice-breaking moment, however, came when world leaders gathered for the G7 roundtable session. As Prime Minister Modi entered the venue, he had a brief chat with EU Council President, while President Trump was seen interacting with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. As Prime Minister Modi went towards his seat, Trump shook hands with him, exchanged smiles, and the two leaders had a brief chat. It was their first face-to-face meet in the last 16 months. Then, sitting beside President Trump, Prime Minister Modi raised concerns over the safety of seafarers in the Strait of Hormuz. In a statement, Prime Minister Modi said that those working at sea must be able to perform their duties without fear or threat to their lives. With Trump looking, Prime Minister Modi also quoted Ronald Reagan's famous maxim, "Trust but verify," saying that world suffers from shortage of trust. Later, as the world leaders gathered for an evening reception, Prime Minister Modi was seen lending a helping hand to President Trump as he made his way to the stage. Trump was also seen holding Prime Minister Modi's hand as the two interacted with each other and other world leaders. The warmth between the two leaders could also mark an inflection point in the strained bilateral ties. With this, all eyes will essentially now be on the much-anticipated bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, which is scheduled for later today. And to get insights on the G7 summit, which is underway, we are being joined by Captain Alok Bansal. He's Director of India Foundation, Executive Director of South Asian Institute for Strategic Affairs. Appreciate you joining us, Captain, on the broadcast. To begin with, all eyes from the India perspective, all eyes are going to be on that bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. What is it that one should look for in terms of safety of the seafarers and even the tariff, for that matter, which has been a bone of contention between US and India?
Yeah, as far as the people in India are concerned, I think firstly, we must be very happy that it is the 7th consecutive time that India has been invited for a G7 summit, and that shows India's growing stature in the Committee of Nations. As far as bilateral meeting with President Trump is concerned, I think the first concern has to be the freedom of navigation, the freedom of passage through Strait of Hormuz. Because Trump has not yet revealed the fine print of the negotiated deal with Iran that we would be keen on knowing. And then we would know what's happening as far as Indo-US trade deal is concerned. Tariffs have been a very big issue. It has actually impacted Indian businesses considerably. But having said that, I think knowing Trump and the way Trump has behaved in the last 2 years, I think it's very difficult to expect anything positive or a permanent from Trump or Trump administration. I think India at this juncture would be looking more to reach out to the European partners, and to that extent his meetings with others at G7 are equally important, because India-EU free trade agreement is, I think, the trade deal is, I think, far more important and far more lasting and will have far greater impact as far as India is concerned than the Indo-US relations, which under the present administration will always go up and down. But having said that, US is our largest export destination. It's a very important facet. We would like, I think, hopefully we should get some positives, though, of course, India-US relations have been under a lot of pressure in recent past.
Yes, Captain, in continuation with the earlier point I mentioned about safety of seafarers on the Strait of Hormuz, with Trump saying that it's in a matter of days, the Strait of Hormuz is going to be fully operational. Your thoughts on the G7 leaders coming together in ensuring that the trust deficit is bridged when it comes to safety of those commercial ships that pass through the strategic waterway?
See, Prime Minister Modi very clearly highlighted that it is the responsibility of the global community, and I think G7 leaders have appreciated, because the seafarers are the one who connect the globe, and I think they do a very valuable job, and I think their lives being threatened is definitely unacceptable, because people would definitely not like to go to sea. And please understand, some of the attacks on seafarers in the recent past have been extremely questionable. There were ships which were empty, waiting, or having some problems who were attacked. And that's extremely sad. So I think this factor has been highlighted by Prime Minister Modi also in his address. And I think the global community has appreciated it. We only hope that Trump also understands that. And the US and the entire international community abides by these facts, and no hapless seafarers are targeted again in any of the conflicts.
Yes, Captain, just last question before we let you go. Talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, there's a statement coming in from President Trump who says that the war does not have any direct impact on US, so as to say. But do you think this essentially puts something that could divide the G7 leaders altogether? Because Trump has said that sanctions are going to be again put when it comes to Russian oil. Will that be enough to pile pressure on the Russian president to ensure that there is a deal in place between Russia and Ukraine, some sort of an agreement to put an end to the hostilities?
See, sanctions were expected as soon as Iranian oil comes into the market, as soon as the Persian oil energy resources get into the market, the US would try and put sanctions on Russian oil, and that was expected. But that has really not prevented Russia or has forced Russia. In fact, the US tried to negotiate a deal. In fact, this was one of the things before his elections. He said that within 48 hours, there'll be peace deal. He has not been able to do so. He's now almost approaching 2 years. So that's how things are. And I don't think so. Just mere sanctions put pressure on Russia to come to a deal. I think both sides will have to come. Zelensky is there. So I think some worthwhile decisions will have to be taken. Some pressures, I think all G7 countries need to come together and then probably talk to Zelensky as well as Putin, because this war has been going on inordinately long, and it's only causing loss of life and property, which is, I think, extremely avoidable. And however, if Trump continues with this attitude, there is likely to be some differences with his European allies who want to take a stronger action, who have been firm and resolute in their support for Ukraine.
Yes, Captain, point taken, and of course lots of key unanswered questions, as you put it. Remains to be seen whether US can actually guarantee the safety of those seafarers or not, and of course what essentially comes out of the bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. But point taken, appreciate you joining us on the broadcast.